Welcome to Cars, etc., etc. My name's Sasha Martinengo. It's great to have you joining us again. And of course, the show is brought to you by altcointrader.co.za. Go there, register for free, and you can start doing cryptocurrency trading. We are talking Lamborghini. And a man I haven't seen for a minute or two, Marius Malherbe, a long and distinguished history when it comes to Lamborghini. It's great to see you. It's been a while.
Thank you. Yeah, it has been a while. Hey?
Yeah. The first thing we've got to start, the story between Ferruccio Lamborghini and Enzo Ferrari. Is it myth or is it legend?
I think it has been embellished on over the years. He certainly did request a meeting with Enzo, and he was turned down. Whether it's as dramatic as what they've made it, because the story goes that he wasn't happy with their gearboxes and he wanted to tell him how to make a gearbox. I don't know if it goes that far, but I mean, he certainly did want to meet Enzo, whether it was a PA or whatever that didn't allow him in there. But I suppose it is a nice story, and I mean I think it's part of the rivalry that's gone on between Lamborghini and Ferrari.
It's got this wonderful mythical feature to it, and also I mean Lamborghini Sant'Agato to Maranello is not far. I mean,
no, it's like 30 k's, 40 k's.
Driving a 999, and there you are.
Exactly. And I mean, the irony also is, I mean, the first Lamborghinis that he made, the gearboxes were probably as cuck as the Ferrari ones anyway. So I don't know why he thought why they talk about the gearbox, but anyway.
It's funny. When you think Lamborghini, you think crazy, you think exotic, you think extreme, and unfortunately, you also think very expensive.
Yeah, I would also add eccentric,
yes.
Different. It's a... I mean, when I was with Lamborghini, you'd always think, well, how do you classify a Lamborghini owner or Lamborghini buyer, and why is he different to a Ferrari or a Porsche buyer, sort of thing? And I think motor racing probably had a lot to do with it. But you ask any schoolboy, what car does he want? Ferrari, read on, And Lamborghini is a bit different. I think, as I say, not more discerning, but it's a guy who actually wants to be different, Yes. I had strange guys that bought cars to drive in the middle of the night, sort of thing, Don't want anybody else to know that they own a car. So it is a little bit more eccentric and different, but it is certainly all of those things, exotic.
And it's just also such a lovely name.
Yeah,
I mean, Lamborghini is just says something. But it's also had a checkered history. Marius, not dissimilar to many other brands. Now it is under the stable of VW. But I mean, there was a time where I think it was owned by the Americans, and then it's strange.
And I suppose it's fortunate that it did have those people, because otherwise it would have gone out of business. I mean, if you look at companies like Izzo and De Tomaso, I mean, they're gone, Okay, Bugatti survived, Lamborghini survived. So, I mean, he effectively sold out to a wealthy mate of his in the 70s, I think. Mm-hmm. And then nothing really happened with it. Then it went across, Chrysler bought it, and that was a disaster. I mean, one of the things, and I mean, I don't know for sure, but if you try and find history on old Lamborghinis, it's very, very difficult, because Chrysler went in and destroyed all the records. Porsche, you can go back and they'll tell you this VIN number was delivered to that thing. Fortunately, some people at the Lamborghini factory kept some of those records.
That is bizarre.
But how would you destroy the history? I suppose you think that's old stuff, so we just get rid of it. Then it was sold to Malaysians.
Yes.
And in actual fact, it was sold to Audi in '98 already.
Yeah.
So that
quite a while.
Yeah, it was 6 years before the Gallardo came out, which is the real. I mean, you could certainly see the Audi influence when that came.
Very much so.
But if it wasn't for those companies, it probably would have ended up in the history pile. So
now it's amazing. We'll talk about the Audi era and, of course, moving on from Murcielago. But prior to that, just picking your brain a little bit earlier, there aren't a lot of Lamborghinis in South Africa prior to Murcielago.
No. So, I mean, at the time, so bear in mind, I was involved from 2001, which was really the launch of the Murcielago, for 10 years. So just before the Hurricane came out, in fact, just before the Aventador came out, I got out. So, but I mean, prior to that, I think they brought 16 Muras into South Africa.
That many?
Yeah.
Wow.
And there are 2 left. There were 3. There was one in Cape Town, but that's also gone now.
So have those Muras been taken out of the country, as opposed to, God forbid,
destroyed? No, I think most of them is exported to Australia.
But there's still
UK.
a few here.
Yeah, 2.
2.
I think. The one, I don't know if the one's left, but that's the last count that I had. But even, you look for a Uraco or a Jalpa, or we never saw the Jarama here, we never saw the Islero here. So we really just saw Uraco, Jalpa, Countach, quite a few.
Diablo.
Mura, Diablo, probably the biggest volume of all of those early cars.
Okay, before we get onto the others, Mura, one of the most beautifully designed cars ever. And it was rather tame in terms of Lamborghini styling.
It was, yeah. I mean, it certainly didn't have the aggression and the wowness of the later cars. But, I mean, people might differ, but that was almost the birth of the supercar.
Yes.
To put a V12 motor transverse sitting behind you, look, it's a nightmare to drive because at 70 miles an hour, there's probably 10 pounds of weight on the front wheels. You've got to put a bag of cement in there to make the thing handle. But in terms of styling, I mean, it is just that Bertoni design is fantastic. And an interesting thing, I don't know if you've ever seen, but if you do have the opportunity, have a look at a Mura from the front and open the doors and drop the windows. Because the doors actually have a little... So if you see it that way with the doors open, it's a bull.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so the horns of the bull actually stand out like that.
I'm glad you bring that up, because the bull story, Murcielago, Countach, what is the significance of the bull to Lamborghini, and also the names of a lot of the cars?
Yeah, so Ferruccio Lamborghini was a Taurian. So he chose the bull as his logo, so that you can see the fighting bull on the Lamborghini badge, and he's named all of his cars after famous fighting bulls, mostly Spanish fighting bulls, with a few exceptions. Espada is actually the spear that they kill the bull with, but Mura was a bull. Murcielago was a famous fighting bull. The story was he was so great, because normally at the end they put the bull down, but he was such a great fighter that they actually spared his life. And they seem to have continued that tradition. Yeah.
Don't get it confused with Espetada. Something a little bit different. You mentioned Jalpa, and when I was sort of in my late teens, when I was staying with my parents, around the corner from us there was a guy who had a blue Jalpa. And it was like the only, Lamborghini that I had seen at that time. And I couldn't wait for the weekends, because that's when he would fire it up. And I would stand on the corner. I was too scared to go near his garage, but I would stand on the corner and just wait for this car to fire up. It was a beautiful car. A little bit finicky when it came to its electronics, I believe. But man, it was a lovely car.
Yeah, and the trouble with the Jalpa is also a bit of a... They took the Uraco. They didn't have money. So the Uraco, which is actually a beautifully styled car, and they said, well, we've got to do something with it. So they put the wheel spats on. They actually increased the engine capacity by just putting another plate on the bottom of the cylinders and increasing the bore and the stroke. So made it from a 3 litre to a 3.5 litre. I think the gearbox was the same. And they produced a car, but it wasn't, in my mind, I never personally liked it. I'd rather get through the thorough thing, which was the Uraco. But it once again, it brought some money into the coffers, I suppose.
Yeah.
And that was because they had the 2 cars at the same time. So the Uraco Jalpa was the budget line. That was the V8. And then the V12s were obviously the first the Mura, then the Countach, then the Diablo, which then became the Murcielago.
Now, if we look at some of the classics that we do have still in South Africa, and as you say, Mura's just slightly different because it's a very, very sought after vehicle, I think mainly because of its design. But if someone's got a Jalpa, or if somebody finds a Jalpa, are these very expensive to service, maintain, fix up, if you had to find one?
Yeah, so it also, and I suppose it's a rule with old cars, you know, if you can't work on it yourself, you better have a big wallet, because they are bloody expensive. And the most expensive parts are really body parts or glass or that sort of stuff, which, you know, if you can panel beat, that's okay. But the rest of the stuff, the mechanical stuff, I mean, they have over the last couple of years, well, even when I was still with Lamborghini, they started, well, they realized that history is important. So you can get a lot of the parts, and they would remanufacture parts. I remember being at the factory, and the little gear drive for the speedometer on the earlier cars, I think they used the same one on the Espada as what they had on the Countach. You couldn't get it. Now they remanufactured that little thing. You pay plenty euros for it. But you could also, if you found an engineering shop over here, somebody could make it for you. So a lot of the guys make their own parts.
Yeah.
Is it expensive to maintain? You know, it's got 8 spark plugs. You can buy them at Midas. It takes oil. You might put a bit of oil additive with it. So it's not that expensive. And also there's most of the cars don't have big electronics.
Yeah, it's an engine.
Yeah. And the wheel bearings run in grease, so if you take it off, you grease it, and as long as you set it to the right tolerances and that. So you've got to have a little bit of sort of engineering experience or motor mech experience, you know, as opposed to plugging a computer in and just replacing parts. So it's not outlandish. I think, and I suppose it's also true if you had an old Ferrari, you took it to the Ferrari agent, you know, his rate per hour is huge, and
correct.
He's got to cover overhead, so you're going to get hurt. But there are enough enthusiasts around that do work on those cars. Yeah.
Now, I remember also growing up as a teenager, on my wall I had this poster that had a Porsche 959, Ferrari 288 GTO, and a Lamborghini Countach.
The white one.
The white one, and then all of a sudden this movie came out called The Cannonball Run.
Yes.
And there was a black Lamborghini Countach with Christy Brinkley. And I was sitting watching the TV going, I don't know who I must look at. Christy Brinkley or the Lamborghini Countach. It is one of the most
iconic cars
ever designed. Nobody had ever seen anything like that. The Porsche 959 was brilliant. The 288 was exceptional. But Countach was like, what is this?
And even today, I mean, we were part of Investment Cars at the time, and we'd organize a breakfast run or something, okay? And the guys would come with fancy Merc Sportsters and all that sort of stuff. When a guy arrives with a Countach, as he stops and those doors open, nobody else looks at anything else. They just look at that. It's amazing. Those scissor doors and that aggressive design of it is just something else.
It's still, I mean, but the amazing thing is, you're telling me there weren't a lot of these cars made.
No.
Far less than I thought.
Yeah, so I mean, the early Countaches, the P400s, they probably made 130 cars. I remember there was one in South Africa. It belonged to the guy who was the chairman of the Lamborghini club at the time, and he took that car with him to the UK. It was a periscope model.
Wow.
But then the later cars, so I think of the 25th anniversary, which was the last of the Countaches, they probably made 250 of those. But it's still, it's minuscule compared to other cars that are around.
And I sit and I've looked at some of the prices of what a 5000S costs compared to the 400. I would expect them to be a higher value. Would you say that's fair? For the limited numbers that they are.
So I suppose, I mean, if you look at the prices of sort of the early Ferraris, I think those are fetching. Look, with the exception of Mura's.
Yes, Mura's different. You know what I mean?
But still, I mean, a Countach today, if you find one in South Africa, it's a 7 million rand car. you know.
As crazy as they are and wonderful as they sound, they weren't very well built. I mean, the gaps between, the bonnet and
It's a racing car. What do you think? Huh? It's a Lamborghini. I remember selling a Lamborghini to a guy. The guy says, it makes a hell of a lot of noise and whatever. I phoned the factory. I said, what's the problem? It's Lamborghini.
It's Lamborghini.
They focused a lot on the engine. I mean, that V12 engine,
yes.
And even the last iteration of that V12 engine, they used to make every single part in the factory. It was amazing. The guy that had the longest service in the Lamborghini factory was the guy that used to make the camshafts. And he made camshafts for like 35 years.
That's it.
That's all he did, make bling camshafts. But he was so proud of it. But absolutely. But also, I mean, in the Countach, I think when they first brought out the Countach, they couldn't get the thing to handle because you got this V12 motor sitting in the back. So you put it in a corner, it's worse than any Porsche. So how did they fix that? They just made the big tires wider. That adds to its aggression, It's flipping 15-inch wheels, but are massively wide.
Oh, it's just still a remarkable car. I mean, it just is something so special about it. Away from their cars, all of a sudden, did Ferruccio Lamborghini or Lamborghini at the time strike a deal with the military? When they built the LM002, and I remember seeing. There's still a couple I've seen in South Africa, and I remember there was a guy in Rosebank who had a sports car shop, and he had one, and it's like a bakkie kind of vehicle. What was its purpose?
So I think it was the Gulf War, and they'd actually concluded the contract to supply. It was basically a knockoff of the Hummer. Yes. So they were going to supply the Arabs with LM002s, and the first ones were full military vehicles. I'm not sure what happened or why the contract was cancelled. And then they said, well, shit, we've got to do something with this. And we then put it into a production thing. So they made 301.
Is that all?
That's it.
Oh, wow.
It does have, I think it's in the 100 worst cars ever built. I think it's number 60.
It's not pretty.
No, but it also says, "Wow." I mean, that's
Lamborghini.
I took my kids to school in it one day. I mean, it was insane.
Everyone's going to stop.
Yeah. So there was a red one which I sold to a guy in Botswana in Maun. And I don't know whatever happened to that car. Okay. It was one of the later models, so that had it was the fuel injected model. It had the same engine as the Countach.
Yeah.
And there's a yellow one which belongs to a collector here in Joburg, and then there were two that belonged to an Italian family. One had actually been converted into a hunting vehicle, and this oak used to sit in the back. And it had a turret, and he'd push a button, and the turret would shoot out the top, and then he could hunt from his Lamborghini.
Oh, that's unbelievable.
And then his kids took it overseas, took it to the UK. That car and another standard car. So, but I suppose also it's old. I mean, they made them in 1990, I suppose.
Yeah, it's 32 years ago.
Yeah.
Are they sought after worldwide?
Once again, there's only 300 ever made. And I mean, where else do you buy something like that? It's something
so outrageous.
Yeah, and I suppose that what has chased the prices up on all Lamborghinis is collectors want the whole range. The trouble with the collector is it disappears. You never see them on the road.
Yeah.
So, you try and find a LM002, there's none available, so they're definitely collectible. I mean, it's the yellow one. And I found it wasn't running, and the collector said, I want it, and he bought it, and he's now spending a lot of money fixing it.
Just getting it. That's wonderful to hear. As we go through sort of like the progression of the Lamborghini Diablo, also another much more refined looking than Countach. But I mean, I remember driving it and being driven in it. It is one of the most violent experiences I ever had. What is your take on the Diablo?
So you can almost say the difference between the Countach and the Diablo was almost the same as the Diablo to the Murcielago. Yeah. So just 10 years newer technology. Still not, people say, it's a fast car, go for a racetrack. It was never designed for the racetrack.
Yeah, not a great handling car.
No. I'll come back to that. But for a tour, I mean, if you go to Mpumalanga, and I mean, you do that strip from Hazy View up to Graskop, okay. Yeah. Those sweeping bends, and you're sitting in third gear, it is just, and you got that magnificent sound. There is just nothing to beat it. You got to know, I mean, it can get tail happy as well. It was also interesting, I became quite friendly with the Australian dealer at the time, just before, or at the time Murcielago came out. And they were running 2 Diablo racing cars.
Okay.
And they set out to prove, A, that they're reliable, and B, that they're fast. And they, for 2 years running, they won the championship in Australia.
Oh, wow, okay.
They didn't break down. So it was possible. And you just got to make sure, pay attention to every little thing. So and they could handle. Okay, they were different to the road-going ones that you have. I mean, they brought out that VT.
Yes.
To me, it made bloody no difference. It was still a horrible thing, you know.
So, I mean, that was just sort of like going, okay, for those who can't drive, we'll add a little bit of traction for you. You know,
in theory, yeah. But it's still, I mean, I suppose if you can't drive, it doesn't matter whether it's got 4 wheels or 2 wheels that are driving it. So, and the funny thing is, I mean, that was probably, because that was their first 4-wheel drive road-going car. And now, of course, all of them are 4-wheel drives. Yeah. Okay, with the exception of the Balboni, and they bring out an occasional
the limited edition or 2-wheel.
But essentially, it's a 4-wheel drive car.
And that's the Audi influence, the VW influence. Yeah. We'll get to that in a short while. Then Audi sort of came in, bought Murcielago. Was that a Lamborghini car or part of Audi transition?
No, I would say Murcielago was still a Lamborghini car. So remember, Audi took over in '98.
Yes.
So I'm sure there was some sharing of technology, maybe on engineering and that, but they certainly didn't influence them at all. The Murcielago was built in the factory in Sant'Agata. It was probably the most advanced when it came to carbon fiber production.
And the sound.
Yeah. The engine was the Diablo motor that they'd refined, and it was still the big chunk of steel would arrive there, and they'd bore 12 holes in it, and
unbelievable.
The same oak making the camshaft.
Beautiful.
So that to me is still the last of the full-blooded Lamborghini. So.
And I mean, listen, I love that car. The sound of that car. I mean, it just screams, and as it goes, just sucks down on the ground. It was just a beautiful, beautiful car. Like with a lot of other brands, when maybe they get taken over, you know, in one of our shows we spoke about Porsche when they went from air-cooled to water-cooled. Now all of a sudden those last air-cooled are quite collectible. Yeah. Murcielago being the last sort of Lamborghini, is it more desirable?
I would certainly think so. And once again, when we started, they were making 400 cars a year for the whole world. I mean, so my first year at Lamborghini, I got 2 cars. I sold them, and what I do for the rest of the year. You know? So, and the next year I got 3 cars. So they're very scarce, those early cars, and I mean, quite a few of them have been written off.
Unfortunately,
so, so they're not many, and some have really been pulled through a hedge backwards. So if you can find a nice one today, I mean, I can probably tell you where they are, but the Oaks probably aren't going to part with them. So they are certainly collectible. But having said that as well, I mean, the very first Lamborghini that I ever drove new was the the Diablo 6 litre, which was the last iteration of the Diablo.
Okay.
And that is a very collectible car as well.
Okay.
Much more refined. So you could almost, if you drove the 93 versus the 99 Diablo, that gap was certainly much closer to the Murcielago. So.
Then we get the Audi, or VW gets in. Audi basically look after everything, and from a marketing perspective, they decide, well, listen, we're going huge.
Yeah.
We've gone from 400 cars a year. We're going to ramp it up. They come out with the Gallardo, beautiful looking car. And I got a little bit worried, Marius, because all of a sudden the market, there were just a lot of Lamborghinis. And I sit and think, I don't know if those cars are as desirable as their predecessors.
Yeah, probably not, because I suppose, once again, there are a hell of a lot more of them available.
Yeah.
But having said that, compared to your other brands, Porsche, Ferrari, there's also very few of them around. The early Gallardos, the paddle shift was not great. So if you can find a manual 2006 model, 2000, that's still a classic car. And you know what was interesting when we went to the launch of Gallardo? It was designed by a guy, Luc Donkerwolke. And I mean, how many guys have, if you go and work for Porsche and you want to design a new 11, they say, well, make sure you design, but it's got to look like that. So you're restricted, so you've got to keep that kind of silhouette going, and there's a lot of history. They gave him a blank piece of paper. They said, phenomenal. Go and design something. So it's got to have 2 seats, it's got to be 4-wheel drive, and put an engine in the back. So he had a
field day.
Yeah. So and he came up with a fantastic design. Eh?
No, magnificent. I mean, because you looked at it and you went, well, it looks nothing like a Murcielago, and that was the last one. So you sort of thought it was going to evolve, and yet the world went crazy for the car. I mean, it really was something incredibly special when it came out.
The first one that we had here, you'll know the guy as well. He's an architect and he loves cars. And he came in and I started talking. He said, no, leave me alone. And he just spent probably nearly an hour looking at that car from every angle. And he just came and he said he has never, ever seen something designed as beautifully as that. So...
and he's an architect. He knows about style. Very, very, very special. And then also, then all of a sudden, we started with these sort of lightweight cars. They brought in Superleggera, as you say, the Bomboni special edition kind of cars.
So you mentioned, the collectability. So, well, 2 things. One is, if you're a manufacturer and you're only making 400 cars a year, you're probably not going to survive.
Yeah.
Unless, if you look at Countach and Pagani, but they charge crazy prices. They're making 25, 30 cars, but it's 30 million plus type of car. So if you want to make money, okay, and that's why I still think you need a big brother, because the technology or the R&D that goes into those things, you need hundreds of engineers. Ferrari have the advantage because they've got the motor racing side. So a lot of the technology that you see in the Ferraris comes from the motor racing side.
Of course.
Audi never had, Audi have got racing now, but Lamborghini certainly didn't have that in the beginning. So I think that's part of the reason that they needed to put volume through. The truth of the matter is, Porsche probably also would have gone under if it wasn't for the 4x4. So guess what Lamborghini have done? They've brought out the Urus. I think it's quite a sexy looking thing. It is a bit different from the other cars. I quite like it. Has it got true Lamborghini soul? If you go and speak to the old Italians in the factory in Sant'Agata, I'll say, you got a new Lamborghini. It's Audi.
Well, there we go. It's actually quite amazing. The guy sits and buys a Urus, and he goes, I own a Lamborghini Urus. You go, that's fantastic. Do you know about, the Countach? Don't know, don't care.
Exactly that. Yeah.
Don't know, don't care. It's a weird kind of thing. Got to talk a little bit about Aventador. The Lamborghini Aventador, another outrageous kind of design. It's sort of like you go Countach, Diablo, Aventador, comes out there. A strange birth, in my opinion, single clutch, and eventually they've sort of figured out. Outrageous looking, outrageous sounding. And then, of course, you get these SVJ versions, lightweight. Are they that fantastic?
So, look, it's a magnificent motor car. But we spoke about it, and if you look at iconic Porsches, so the most iconic Porsche is 73 RS. Everybody, that's the thing to go for. Why? Because they only made 1,500 and that sort of stuff. So, and if you look at some of the other collectible Porsches, it's those limited edition ones that make the difference. I had guys wanting Lamborghinis, and they said, no, I don't want the ordinary one. I want the SVR, or I want the Superleggera. Okay. I want that because there's the volume, and here's the little cherry. That's the one I'm going to keep.
Explain.
So Aventador, the same thing. I have to share a story with you. I was sitting in Parkhurst just having lunch on a Saturday afternoon. And, I mean, it's a parade of cars. I mean, you see McLarens and fancy BMs and noisy Mercs or anything that goes past. And, I mean, everyone kind of looks. A guy came down with a Aventador. I mean, there was just silence. Everybody and all the restaurants, they just stopped, you know.
Yeah.
The fact that he had two blue light blooming black BMWs behind him was something else, but he couldn't even turn around the circle. He had to go and observe
3.2.
But it just, I thought, well, what? I don't need to say anything.
Yeah,
just the statement it makes is just unbelievable.
All on its own.
Yeah.
Last one, controversial one. Is Lamborghini the test bench for Audi, and should it not be the other way around?
I don't know. You know, it used to irk me a bit that you have the Gallardo that came out, and then Audi bring out the R8. Okay.
Yes.
And everyone, well, a lot of people say, oh, it's the same thing. Well, not quite. The R8 is actually about 8 centimeters, 9 centimeters longer. The engine might have the same bottom end V10, but it's got different engine management system and that. So if you look at the Gallardo, that engineering came from Audi.
Yeah, of course.
Because the Italians, and it was interesting. I used to go to the factory every year. In 2001, when I went for the launch of the Murcielago, you struggled to find somebody who could speak English. They were Italian. Okay. Then over a period, it was interesting that every time I went there, I had everybody coming in, they want to speak English to me. And I'm saying, no, you've got to teach me how to speak Italian. They said, no. And Lamborghini had a drive. They said 90% of their customers around the world are English. So they need to speak English to be able to communicate
Correct.
with their customers. So they had a special program in the factory where you could learn to speak English. By the time the Gallardo came out, you could see that key positions were now German.
Yeah.
You know, and you go to the factory now, they call it a factory. It's actually just an assembly plant because the engine comes from Austria, you know, so all the bits, and they just come together there. Whereas the old style Murcielago, I still think of the oak making the camshafts there. So is Audi the test bed? I personally would have said, why don't you put Lamborghini into 24 hours, you know, and drive the brand that way? But then I look back and I say, Lamborghini actually never went into racing in a big way, not like Porsche and Ferrari and those sort of things, and Aston Martin. So it's more, and maybe that's their decision. We'll let Audi do the racing, and I mean they're doing pretty well. They were magnificent.
Superb.
Yeah. So I must say, when I was quite chuffed when I went to the 9 hour and there was not a single Porsche, there were 2 Lamborghinis there and they didn't break down, so it was
nice to see. Because I mean, I sit there when Huracan came out, also another beautiful design, but basically they put the old R8 engine into a brand new car, and then they went and put out a new R8 with a new engine.
Yeah. And
that's where I sat and went, come on guys, we're getting this the wrong way around.
Yeah. You know, if you're going to go for world records and that sort of stuff, decide which brand you're going to go, because and the trouble is, you have a guy coming in and saying, it's normally an accountant who buys it, you know, and he says, why must I buy a Huracan where I can buy an R8? Because it's the same thing. Yeah. It's not actually. You know,
no, of course, yeah.
That badge on the front, that's worth the extra 2 million rand, you know.
Yes, and funny enough, the first time I saw the Huracan, I went to go and just look at all of the brakes, and on the rear brakes there was an Audi badge, and I just thought, come on guys, you know, things like that are just annoying. Take nothing away from it, Marius. I mean, the future for Lamborghini looks very, very promising, still under the guise of VW. They've done a remarkable job in turning that brand around and turning it into a very profitable company.
Yeah, and as we said earlier on, I mean, if it wasn't for the Audi, they probably would have petered out. You know, I look at, I mean, Aston Martin, and I mean, I don't know a hell of a lot about it, but they don't have a big brother to kind of help them out. So you kind of worry, and there's nothing, they make new changes, but it's nothing, wow, you know, there's not. Yeah. Whereas Lamborghini, you've seen it, you've had Murcielago, Aventador, difference. You had a Gallardo Hurricane, new car, So I'm waiting now because it's time for a new Lamborghini.
It's time for something new.
That's it. The Aventador is finished now.
Yeah.
So we wait and see what they've introduced the Urus, but I mean, that's, as we said, is
and a sort of limited edition Countach, 50 year, I think, or whatever.
I don't know if you ever saw that they made a mock of a Miura concept car.
Oh, I don't
At the time of it's one in the, if ever you go to the factory in the museum,
okay,
they took the Miura shape and they made it into a modern car. So it's a much bigger car. But I looked at that and I thought, this something
you never
might
know.
be, yeah.
Marius, great to catch up. Thank you so much for your insight and your knowledge.
No, it's a pleasure.
Lamborghini.
Thanks for chatting.
I hope we can do it again.
It's something that I've stayed passionate about.
Yeah.
I still have an old Lamborghini that I'm busy putting together. It's none of these fancy things. But,
it's still a Lamborghini. There we go. That's it for cars, etc., etc. Thanks for joining us. As always, brought to you by altcointrader.co.za. Go there, register, go and play on cryptocurrency. Until the next time, take care. Ciao, ciao.
Ferrous Cars is a Ferrari specialist dealership in Sandton, Johannesburg. Since 2010, Ferrous Cars has dealt in all things related to Maranello's finest, from classics to the contemporary. Sales, service, advice and exclusive events, Ferrous either has it or has access to it. And of course, in partnership with Altcoin Trader, Ferrous Cars accepts cryptocurrency and can even help you buy your dream car from any other dealership in crypto. Check out their website at ferrouscars.com or follow them on all popular social media platforms.